Alright, so I typically try to avoid this kind of thing, the whole talking about movies that are associated with other movies that just happen to be coming out, because I find that kind of a bit tacky most of the time. But this time I couldn't really help it, because obviously we have It Chapter 2 coming out Friday, which means this was yet another time, out of many times in my life, where I just become totally and completely consumed by this story. It's one of those cases where I discovered it, the miniseries first, on a VHS, where this cover itself is what caught my attention. And then I found the book shortly afterwards, and it just kind of went from there, and I kind of became obsessed with the concept and the characters and the story itself. And then obviously as time went on, the more existential dread sort of parts of it. And it's just something that I constantly come back to. So obviously it's been a very exciting couple of years with the new movies coming out. But I figure we can talk about this before we go into it. Since it's on my mind like constantly over the past couple of weeks or so leading into Friday. So the thing about this, first of all, is I'm obviously going to do, right now we're going to talk about part 1 of the miniseries, and then I'll do a second video tomorrow that'll be part 2 of it, and then that should take us pretty much into Friday. And of course, a lot of people have come to the conclusion that they much prefer the first part to the second part. But I'm just kind of, I sort of feel like I'm in the Full Metal Jacket argument I always end up in. I'm just in it for the whole thing. The first part, the second part, whatever it is. But I totally and completely understand the people that feel the first half, whether it be the miniseries or the book, is significantly stronger. And we're going to go into the reasons why. But the first thing I need to acknowledge right away is you'll notice with this being in the horror genre that it is going to have one particular criticism thrown at it should people feel this way. And it's one that always bothers me specifically about this movie and this story. And that is that some people don't like it because they just don't think it's scary. But I've never really approached this story itself in any of its mediums based on that. I think with all the things in this story, it's kind of a weird thing to single out specifically, and I know it's absolutely a horror story, and the whole basis of the concept is fear, but at the same time, I feel like whether or not it's scary has never been what really the appeal was to me. It's just a bonus every now and then if it can get me to that point. Because I think the main thing here is that it's the idea of, do you find clowns scary or not? Seems to be the main thing, and while a lot of people will say yes, very much so, I'm not really one of those people, but specifically this story kind of made me delve into thinking about what it is that still draws me to it, because there's something about the clown image that draws me in, and it's not because I'm afraid of them, because you look at stuff like the appeal of this, or Killer Clowns from Outer Space, I guess, or The Joker, and I think for me, it's the fact that clowns have such that exaggerated, unnatural look, where like everything is like really bright and colorful, and oftentimes it's put against a background that's really contrasts that. I think that's especially the case in the Joker's case, but with a movie like this, where it was this image on the cover that made me pick it up off the shelf when I saw it on VHS. And this was the only thing I knew about it, was that there was a clown on the cover and it was a horror movie. And that was enough to make me go, I kind of want to see what that is. And yeah, so, and the thing about it, whether it's scary or not being an issue, there's the whole thing about, like, it's not so much about your particular fears and whether you find it scary, because it's about the individual fears of individual characters, and the whole concept is based on that idea of everybody's going to find something scary that maybe somebody else doesn't. The scene that really stands out for me in this one is the werewolf, which for the most part looks pretty silly, right? But then you think about the context of it, and you realize that it being Richie's fear in this, and it's the idea that, first off, the movie's set in the 50s when I Was a Teenage Werewolf was like brand new, and it was back when they didn't have the effects to do the stuff with horror they're doing now. So back in the 50s, stuff like I Was a Teenage Werewolf was terrifying to people, especially very young children like Richie. So that, in that case, it makes a lot more, like, it's not necessarily that I have to find it scary, but that it makes sense that Richie finds it scary is the important thing about the exploration of fear. And that's just one example when it's the case for pretty much everybody, and that kind of goes in also with when I was still in elementary school and a lot of people were seeing this. I noticed that every time I talked about it with somebody, somebody else said that a different scene is the one that scared them. Where it's not, a lot of people like won't say, God, the whole thing freaked me out. It's always like one particular scene for one particular person. I was talking to a girl one time and she said that the scene that got to her was the sink. Really freaked her out. And then there was one kid that said that showers freaked him out for a little bit after he saw it because of the scene with Eddie. And it's like, that's kind of the perfect personification of what the story's going for. Is you don't necessarily have to find it scary, the whole thing, but just sort of identify with why the characters in the movie are scared and of what. So yeah, that's never been an issue for me as to whether or not it's scary, but I will say that when I did see it for the first time, I was obviously extremely young, and I didn't know at all, like, what it was. I only knew the cover. And so when I saw the first, 10 or 15 minutes, yeah, it was really freaky to me, especially not knowing what's happening, because you start off with the very first scene, with Lorianne on the tricycle, and she's coming inside, and there's a storm brewing, and the sheets are blowing, and we can start off hearing Pennywise's voice, and it's like, alright. And then there's that really quick flash of him smiling at her and saying hi to her. And then it's like, okay, yeah, this is how this would start, of course it is. But then there's that one cut, just really, really quickly. When I did a video talking about the movie from a couple years ago, I compared it to the moment in the new movie when he's laughing with Georgie about the popcorn and then he just stops. This very much reminded me of that, but it's when we get that one cut of him where the first cut we get of him, he's smiling, and then that second cut we get of him, and these are the only two shots we get of his face in this scene, it is suddenly morphed into, like, not even really a hunger, but like an anger, like a hatred for Lorianne before he eats her, or whatever the hell it is he does to her. Obviously, she's intact enough that they're able to wheel her away when Mike gets there. But clearly something awful has happened and he has killed her. And presumably eaten something. And that's the thing, too, is when I first saw this, it wasn't exactly a popular thing to kill children in movies or TV, or especially TV, actually. The fact that this is a miniseries actually makes it even more like it's, to my understanding, this is often looked at as a starter point to when TV starting getting a bit more hardcore in what it could show, just regularly. So yes, so we've had his look through the sheets, and we've had a child being killed. And it's like, alright, that's pretty freaky for child me to see unexpectedly, but let's go on. And then, of course, the Georgia scene happens, which is a scene that, when you first see it in your entire life, is a scene that will never, ever leave your head. Even if the new movie had never come out and did that scene perfectly in itself, this particular version of the scene would never have left our heads. And this is the version that doesn't show us Georgie getting his arm ripped off and bleeding out and then getting pulled into the sewer. Actually, it's almost more horrific in this because it's implied that he just bled out on the street. And they just found him there. And Pennywise just took his arm and that's it. Once again, presumably, because they even have the funeral and everything, and that's I believe that's the way the book describes it. But the thing about this is this is when we really get a good look of the great stuff that Tim Curry is doing here. Where he did take it to a bit of a, you know, cartoonish level, but that's kind of the point. Because I heard that was a lot of criticism I heard about Skarsgård's performance, was that he wasn't playful enough, so it wasn't as believable that he could like lure children to him. And Curry really goes into that, but it's not. He always finds a way to bring it back. Like the whole thing is personified in that opening scene with the sheets, where it's 1 second he's playful, and then the next cut he's going to fucking kill you, horrifically. So in this moment, when he's, you know, offering his balloon and he offers the boat and stuff like that, there is something. He acts like a clown. Like a clown would at any particular, you know, state fair or circus or whatever the hell. And that's what makes it so creepy when we see him kind of devolve in this scene into the hungry monster that he is, when he's just talking to Georgie casually, and you can see the moment when he realizes he's got Georgie convinced that there are balloons in the circus down there. When he says, "Do they float?" and when he says, "Oh yes, we can see hungry Pennywise now," and then just it going from there, and the way he's able to just do that transition so seamlessly is what makes the character work, and the way he can bounce back and make Pennywise scary again after he's been, you know, like the scene in the library, for instance, in the second part that we'll probably talk about later, but. Yeah, and there's even, he was doing like a fan expo a couple of years ago, shortly before the new movie came out, and he was talking about this at great length, and he was talking about the sewer scene, and he was saying that when he was doing the scene with the actor playing Georgie, he had said that he like wanted to stop filming because Tim Curry was scaring him, and Curry had to remind him, you know, it's my job to scare you, so if you're scared, we're both doing our jobs right. So, and going on that, we do go into the format that the book sets up, where we have them getting the phone calls, and then each phone call prompts a flashback, where we're introduced to our child cast as well as our adult cast at the same time. And as far as the adult cast goes here, once again, there is a lot of criticism thrown at them. Even the director himself, I think he said, he didn't find the actors as magnetic as he found the other actors, the adult actors. He didn't find, god damn it, he didn't find the adult actors as magnetic as the child actors. There you go. But the thing about that is that, and yet, even though there are some choices here where you're like, oh yeah, they kind of went for that, but then there are cases where it was like they completely went off. Like the fact that Bill is bald in the book, and they mention that many times. So they decided to not only give Richard Thomas long hair, but also a ponytail for some fucking reason. But yeah, okay, this is this version of Bill, and yeah, I can buy this somehow. I just can. The one thing that does sort of stand out, and this is a case of, I'm not usually the person that gets all bent out of shape when a character doesn't like look exactly or fit the exact description that they did in like the source material. But it does feel, there's a few things about Annette O'Toole in this. I do think she's a fine actress overall in stuff like Cat People or that romance movie with Martin Short. But this one, I'm not sure. I think it's really just a case of probably miscasting. She's great casting as far as casting an adult version of Emily Perkins, the actress that plays Bev as a child. But she's got some very, very sort of soap opera acting going on, particularly in the scene with Tom. Almost like she was the only one that was acting like she was in a TV movie. Everybody else kind of tried to make it feel a bit more, I don't know if cinematic's the word, but yeah, but another thing that kind of bothers me about Annette O'Toole, even more so than the soap opera acting, is, yeah, if you're familiar enough with the book, and you've since grown accustomed to Sophia Lillis' amazing performance. It does not feel right at all to see a Beverly Marsh that's not a redhead. I said I normally don't care for people to get that bent out of shape over something that doesn't matter that much. But sometimes there's just things you grow attached to, and that's one of them for me. And yeah. But I mean, overall, still, I do think the adult cast is really good. Tim Reed, especially, is like the perfect adult Mike. And the thing about it that I noticed the most about how well the adult cast does work, and this is maybe just a me thing, is that I cannot, honestly, I cannot read the book now without imagining them when I read those characters. Like, it's something that I try to stray away from, and it's like I kind of go more on how King described them, or now we have the new cast. But it's like my brain can't do it. Every time I read the book, I go back to these faces when I read the characters. And it's just ingrained in there now. And it's not even necessarily that I saw this many times before I read the book. I saw this once before I read the book. But those interpretations of the character just stuck with me enough that I can just totally buy all of them. Dennis Christopher as Eddie is perfect. Harry Anderson is Richie. I also heard I wasn't quite sure, but I remembered reading something eerie about the fact that obviously Harry Anderson just died recently, and apparently it was like 2 days before it was announced that Bill Hader had gotten the part of Richie in the new movie, just purely by the coincidence of when that was announced. So yeah, and of course John Ritter I think is a perfect Ben also, but yeah, I do understand that even though we do have a lot of talented actors here and a lot of recognizable actors here, it is kind of easy to see performance-wise and the focus the movie has why people would be more drawn to the child actors, because you got Jonathan Brandis as Bill, who is like the perfect embodiment of like that sort of fearless leader type. A lot of these kids like didn't really do a whole lot else. I think the only ones I recognize from other things are Seth Green, obviously, and Emily Perkins, who plays Beverly. I'm sure she did more things, but the one thing I remember, like, identifying her in the oddest of places is she's the receptionist in Juno at the abortion clinic that has the boyfriend with the pie balls. So that's what she went on to do. I think the guy that plays young Stan, like, didn't do anything but this. So yeah, and so every now and then they were around, and they do really capture, once again, a lot of what's in the feel of the characters in the book, even if they don't necessarily fit the descriptions entirely. Kid playing young Ben is also particularly good in the way that he sort of has that, in another universe, he would probably be the leader of their group, but he's kind of got that sort of smart way about him, but then at the same time there's also that childlike naivete that's still there, and that's like he's sort of doing a balancing act with those. The scene that stands out in a scene like that would be when Eddie's having his asthma attack and Bill takes off to help him and get his inhaler, and the first thing Ben does is offer him candy while he's having an asthma attack, and stuff like that. And then that's when it kind of gets into the whole coming of age factor. Where you can almost, much like the characters themselves, you can almost kind of forget you're in a horror movie for a little bit, and it totally plays up. Like you can tell it's from the same mind that eventually like Stand By Me, characters like that, where even you know Ace is like a lot like the Henry Bowers character, but even so. I can't remember which of these came first between those two, but regardless, you can see the similarities and they come from the same mind, and you can kind of get the same feel into how they captured childhood. Even that was pretty much Stand By Me's whole point, and this is pretty much just Stand By Me with a horror movie in it. You can still really feel that sort of authentic thing that gives you. It's another one of those cases where, being set in the 50s, there's still so many things that are relatable in their childhoods and their characters that are so sort of, you know, just widespread in general and as far as their relatability goes, that even being set in the 50s, you can still feel like a nostalgic factor when you see these scenes of them just hanging out. Because I imagine, a lot of us had that sort of, like, creek or some shit. That place we went as children where all of our friends were, like, sort of, yeah. I know creek is a very West Virginia thing to say, but the dam and the Barrens, it's close enough. And speaking of that also, another person that I think really shines in this movie is Jared Blankard, I believe is his name, that plays young Henry Bowers. And in this particular case, I can see where I know some people think that the whole greaser look is a bit on the nose, which I can't necessarily disagree with. But he's another one of those cases where I just feel like he's the perfect casting. Like, I mean, I really love what Nicholas Hamilton does in the new movies. But once again, I just cannot see Henry Bowers in my head without thinking of Jared Blankard first. Because it's one of those cases where, I mean, not only is he just kind of perfect for the character, but the way he's able to play all the different facets of Henry. Because there are many. You would think he'd be a normal, Stephen King bully character. But you've got the side where he's doing, like, the petty shit. Like, just the regular bullying. Like, he's got the childish insults. There's the scene where he and Belch and Victor just kick the dam over. And it's like they're just doing petty shit for the sake of it. But then there are the moments when, like, he's getting ready to carve his name into Ben's stomach. Or when he's trapped Stan in the sewer. And we actually genuinely believe that he's a total psychopath. And the interesting thing about that is the miniseries never seems to play up the fact of Henry being controlled by it, at least in the first half, like when he's a child. So it just looks like he goes full-blown psycho because it was already in his nature. Because there's not much... they don't really bring Butch into the equation at all, his dad. So there's this whole thing where it's like... He's dangerous without feeling like he's controlled, and we're not really quite sure where it comes from, but we just know that he probably had one of those, generic bully backgrounds. But obviously, it's until reading the book you realize just how fucked up Butch Bowers was, too, and how he basically got to that point. But in the most we get of that is when he's told that he's going to get detention again, and he says, "My father will tear my hide." And that's about it. That's about the only reference to Butch that we get. And it's like that could be, in that era of the 50s, that he could have been talking about anybody's dad, really. So, and then they even take that a step further. Something this addresses that I don't remember the new movie doing it, at least directly as this does, is his racism towards Mike. How he just flat out says the slurs. Which apparently I read that Blankard was very, very uncomfortable with, and he's actually still... I think he still hangs out with the kid that played Mike. They're like at conventions and shit together. And so... And the way they delve into that, I think, is really something where you can tell they're trying to do it as much as they can, but they're also within the confines of being a TV movie. And even though this was pushing that envelope, that's still going to be... There's still going to be restrictions. So... Yeah, but... so they're going to obviously skip a lot of, major themes, unfortunately. But I mean, apart from that... And I think I mentioned this when I talked about the new movie a couple years ago. I do think this miniseries, because, obviously the book has a lot of sexual content and the language and all that. A lot of people assume that the miniseries being a TV movie, it's extremely watered down. I mean, there's no question about it. I didn't even mention the fucking gore. Oh, the sex and the language is terrible in it. I wonder if there's anything else I'm trying to think of. Yes, obviously also the extremely gruesome, horrific things that happen. So there's going to be a lot of restrictions. But with that in mind, I still think it's an incredibly faithful adaptation for the most part. For what is in here. For the most part, the dialogue is, like, right down to it. There's even the moment when Pennywise is in the sewer, and he's trying to convince Georgie, and he says correct as correct, and it's written phonetically like that in the novel, and that's the way Tim Curry says it. All the way down to that. The only thing they do is they take out the language, and the dialogue is there. And then the scenes also, like I said, the main thing is that a lot of our themes are missing, really just due to time constraints, I imagine. Like this, it's insane when you watch this at first and you're like, God, 3 hours is so incredibly long, and then you read the book and you see like the new movies and you're like, God, why is it so short? There's no way 3 hours was ever going to cover all that. They completely took out the house on Evil Street, which is kind of insane when you think about it. But the way they were able to go around it in this, when you're watching this, you don't really miss it, which is impressive in itself. Especially because when you watch the new movie from a couple of years ago, The House on Evil Street is the most thrilling scene in the movie, and it's like the way they can both handle that in two totally different ways by making it this incredible centerpiece in one movie and completely omitting it in another, but still getting the points across that they need, that they pretty much tell the full story as far as the general layout. But yeah, and then there's the stuff that they add themselves, like the idea of using Eddie's inhaler, all of them using it before they go in as sort of this bonding thing is something I really like that they added. The fact that Eddie still lives with his mother as opposed to having a wife that acts like his mother as he does in the book. I like how they just kind of cut out the middleman there, and he's like, no, his mom's still alive, and he's still living with her after all this time. It's like, that's actually almost believable than Eddie getting married. Like, I hate to go against King himself, but I actually almost buy what the miniseries did with that more. So, yes, and the whole thing about, talking about the dialogue being just exactly what it is in the book. Whenever Bev's dad says, I worry about you, Bevy, I worry a lot, and a lot is, that second a lot is always in italics in the book. And it's like, I was hearing that, if I had read the book first, I would have already heard it in that actor's voice that plays her dad in the miniseries, say that line over and over again the way that he does. So that was just, that couldn't have been more perfectly adapted with that particular actor. So, yeah, and I love the line. There are many moments in the book, especially towards the end when when Id is starting to like lose, confidence in himself, when he's actually getting scared of the Losers Club, and he keeps referring to himself as the Eater of Worlds, I guess to kind of build himself up, or herself, excuse me. But they add a couple of lines in this when he puts Stan up against the wall. And he says, and this is in that Tim Curry voice, I am the Eater of Worlds and of children, and you're next. I think is amazing. It's like, I could not believe that line wasn't in full like that in the book. And I said, maybe it's, and it would sound cheesy maybe on paper, maybe that's why. But coming out of Tim Curry's voice, it is like so incredibly intimidating. I love it. So, yeah, and yeah, that whole sort of confrontation does get, you can see the sort of, like, the sewer set is amazing, but you can sort of see the effects being at a TV movie's budget. I mean, they do some great stuff, like us only seeing it from its own perspective, going through the pipe or whatever, is really well done, and the way they showed that, and the whole idea of like Henry's hair turning white, I think is specifically this, and I don't think that's in the book if I remember correctly. So that's kind of a cool detail too, because they talk about every now and then when people look in the deadlights and they're talking about, it still chills me when they talk about when at the beginning as he's killing Georgie, and when Georgie like sees what it really is, and they say that like he instantly lost his sanity when he saw it. And so I thought they really interpreted that well with the whole, with what happens when Henry sees it. While it doesn't necessarily, like, kill him instantly like it would, like it does Tom in the book, or like what Georgie saw, it's still, like, it does just enough under its own budget to do it. Like I said, even if, when they're actually fighting Pennywise, like, the makeup is kind of cool, and kind of is one of Pennywise's iconic looks when, like, his face is melting. But the whole flipping through the air, going through the thing, and Jonathan Brandis grabbing his arm instead of the other way around. I guess maybe we're supposed to assume that it made him do that, or I feel like it's just it was a shitty interpretation of it grabs his arm on his way down. And they just didn't have another cut, apparently. They didn't have another shot of it, another take or whatever. But then that's paid off when we get the one glimpse of what's underneath the glove. So yeah, if for every bad effect, there is a good one, or them using limited effects to make a bigger, implied effect. So I feel like for the most part, they've kind of been getting a bad rap lately in regards to how this is interpreted, because a lot of people are going back to it and saying like, oh, it's cheesy, it's not scary. But I talked for like fucking 10 minutes about why it doesn't matter if it's scary or not. And it feels ridiculous to judge a story so vast on that alone. So yes, so that's pretty much how they handled the first part. I don't think I left anything out that's extremely crucial. If I did, I'll think about it 3 hours from now and be kicking myself, or I'll just mention it in the second video I'm going to do on the second part. So, yeah, so I think I'll just go ahead and end this here until we get to part 2. So until then, I think that's it for this.